Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Tracy Allen from RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, coming to you from beautiful downtown Troy. I'm the Associate Director here, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 5th session, Combating Racism in Libraries. And today's topic is EDI in Human Resources and Microaggressions in the Workplace. As Jeremy said today, the session is supported by PLS and ESRT. So PLS is the Public Library section of the New York Library Association and is dedicated to supporting libraries, supporting public libraries and public library staff all over the state. Our goal is to help sustain and improve libraries and library services by providing continuing education opportunities, conferences, programming, awards, scholarships, advocacy, and supporting key library initiatives. ESRT, go ESRT, Ethnic Services Roundtable is a roundtable of NYLA and it's focused on ethnic services, specifically on sharing information through cooperative network, promoting, relating collections, design services, and providing up-to-date functioning funding and information. Great group. If you don't know about it, look into it. As such, I am pleased to welcome our moderator for today's session, Manny Figueroa, who is the Talent and Development and Training Manager for the Queens Public Library and an active member of ESRT. Take it over, Manny.
Thank you, Tracy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I'm very much looking forward to this. We have some wonderful speakers, and I would like to introduce them to you. Let me just share the screen. Okay, so we have today with us Tamara King, who is the Community Relations Director for Richland Library. In her role, she is tasked with developing, directing, and implementing communication strategies to key stakeholders and audiences of Richland Library. Tamara also supervises the Office of Development, which supports the Richmond Library Friends and Foundation, along with the Library Volunteer Program. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in broadcast television, public relations, marketing, strategic communications, media crisis communication training, and program management. In addition to her role leading the library's communities relations efforts, Tamara also chairs the library's award-winning Let's Talk Race team. Through Tamara's leadership, the team has held discussions surrounding empathy, race, women's rights, and social justice for nearly 2,000 participants. Tamara is a nationally and locally recognized award-winning public relations professional and was recognized as the 2019 Library Journal Mover and Shaker for her role in Richland Library's race, equity, and social awareness work. She has won communication awards from the International Association of Business Communicators of South Carolina and the South Carolina Public Relations Society. Tamara also won a National Bronze Telly Award as host and producer of the nationally recognized public affairs show, Richland Revealed. Tamara has a degree in journalism and mass communication and a master's degree in library and information science from the University of South Carolina. We also have Cici Holloway. Cici Holloway is Richland Library's Chief Human Resources and Diversity Officer. In her role, she manages the Library Human Resources Department, and she is tasked with applying an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens to the decisions of library administration and ensuring its work, both internally and publicly, leads to a more inclusive organization and community in Richland County and beyond. In her role, Cici also oversees the library's learning engagement efforts. She has successfully led the HR and diversity, equity, inclusion efforts in some of the most visible brands in the world. Her expertise expands various industries, including entertainment, sports, digital media, and finance. She has worked for notable Fortune firms such as Viacom, Spelling Entertainment, UBS, CSM Sport and Entertainment, the Atlanta Falcons Radio. She has also led global teams for Showtime, MTV Networks, Nickelodeon, Big Ticket Television, Virgin Interactive, CBS, and Paramount Pictures. So welcome both Cici and Tamara. And we will begin by first establishing our definitions. So how would you define equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Hi, thank you so much. I think Tamara and I were trying to unmute at the same time.
Yeah.
I'll jump in if it's okay first, and we'll tag team as we go along. We understand this is a conversation and not necessarily a presentation, right? So so we'll jointly answer some of these questions. I look at the definitions. I don't look at them as mutually exclusive. The way I look at them, they're all connected. So diversity is often perceived about difference, right? The differences that we bring each day, wherever we go to work or wherever we go in our lives. It's the perspectives that we bring, it's our background, it's the way we think. And so bringing all of that difference helps us to have a view in the libraries, a view of tough conversations when necessary, and also how those differences then support inclusion. So that's why I say they're not mutually exclusive. Diversity supports inclusion, because if we have true inclusion, right, now we are prompting discussions, we're prompting answering concerns, we're also providing a welcoming environment. This allows employees, right, to have inclusion, allows employees to bring their full, authentic self to work every day, which then encourages a sense of belonging. And then when we tie, if you have diversity, which is difference, and you tie it to belonging, which is inclusion, then it should yield equity when done right, because it's not, doesn't mean equal. What it does mean is that the organization applies fairness, right? It applies fairness to everything that it does. And so when we value diversity, we value inclusion, you're going to yield equity.
I definitely echo exactly what Cici said, and it's a lot of the mission and mindset that the library has had and continues to do every single day. We've been doing the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and making sure all three of those things, they all work together and they form this really nice tapestry in Columbia, because our community is made up of so many diverse people with different backgrounds. And I think the library wants to make sure that when you walk into our doors, you don't just see one kind of thread. You see it all, and everyone is welcomed inside. And I think that's been really important. When you think about diversity, equity, inclusion, sometimes I think libraries tend to think we are neutral spaces, and we'll probably get into that a little bit later. And we are neutral spaces, but we cannot be neutral about the very core of who we are, which is equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I think that is something that should be at the front of our minds in a lot of ways.
Great, thank you. So what value does diversity, and when I say diversity, I mean all types of diversity, what value does diversity bring to organizations?
I think I'll yield to Cici if she wants to go first.
You go first.
I think the value is really summed up in a story, if I could tell that. During our Let's Talk Race discussions, we have people from all walks come into these public discussions with carrying their own baggage, carrying their own preconceived notions. And one of our talks, and each moderator, which is a library staff person, is sitting at the table, usually pre-COVID, with our folks. And one of the interesting things that happens is people start seeing each other for not necessarily what they walk in looking like, but who they are. And what was really interesting, one of our moderators was in a group with an older Black couple, and a younger white person, and I think someone else that was from the Latinx community. And they hit it off so well that they started pre-COVID. They started a lunch date outside of the library, outside of the program, because for many of them, that was the first time they'd had any deep conversations with people of another race, and an opportunity to ask those questions like, why is it wrong to touch a Black person's hair? Or is it Latinx? Or is it Hispanic? Or what do you prefer? Those questions that you typically can't ask, or you kind of shy away from asking. So when I think of diversity, equity, and inclusion and the importance of it, is it gives you a window into someone else. It gives you an opportunity to see that we are more alike than we are different, and how important every voice is to making sure that we're all on the same page, no pun intended, when talking about libraries. But Cici?
Yes, and I'll add to that because I definitely agree that it is, it's kind of a level set. It's an equalizer to make sure that we all have, when we focus on diversity within an organization, it does help us to speak that language. Tamara said, you know, is it Latinx? Is it Hispanic? Is it Latino? I find that with, you know, being a Black female, I find it with African American versus Black. You know, people will ask me all the time, what's the proper way to say it, right? There is no proper way, right? It depends on the individual. So allowing that kind of conversation or encouraging that kind of conversation in safe space is so key. But I will also layer in, because I know we all have roles in our organization. So I'll layer in as leadership for our employees. I think the value of adding diversity and having all types in an organization when it relates to the employees has some other benefits, right? So first of all, is having the leadership commitment, right? Making sure that our leadership, for us, it's our CEO, but it's also our leadership team. And then I also emphasize that diversity and DEI belonging initiatives are not owned by the organization. I suggest to you that it's owned by every employee that walks through the door. So they tend to look up at the organization, and we say, no, it's all of our responsibility. So I look at accountability and ownership of diversity work through all employees. And then the other thing that's very important is not to isolate diversity on the side. It really should be integrated into all of our processes, particularly our people processes. So when we're looking at promotions, when we're looking at, we call it PFP, pay for performance, but whatever your merit processes are, whatever your promotion process, who gets to go to certain trainings and or events outside of the organization, really factor in, layer in a lens of diversity in every people process is something else that I recommend. And then lastly, if you do all of that right, because I think that's the question, Manny, the question was, how does this affect the organization, right? So the impact to the organization truly is, if you do that right, then it creates a welcoming and engaging culture for not just your employees, but your customers too.
So thank you. When it comes to inclusion, how do you foster an environment where people who come from different backgrounds know you value their ideas? And Cici, I guess you're on, so you can go ahead and.
I'll come back. So how do we know when we value employees' ideas? Kind of, I guess it's like an inclusive kind of strategy, because it goes back to the people strategy where I said where we've looked at diversity. We also want everybody to bring their diverse self to work each day. So that's how we know when our employees feel comfortable enough that they can engage, that they feel valued, that they feel heard. So I know in my organization, they're tired of me. I sound like a broken record because this is how I do it. I say, first, I want to listen. I want to listen to what our employees say. Based on the listening, I want to learn. So it's listen, then learn, and then act. Because just listening, talking, learning is not good enough, right? So the act is, I heard you. I want to take that information and I want to apply it. I want to implement, and I want to let you know that it's based on what I heard. So it's the connection of them all. And then the last piece of that is to stay inspired, because we don't want to check the box. And I think what happens, and not us on this call, but some organizations, when current events kick in, everybody goes straight to action, right? We want to send out memos, we want to do things, we want to create, and then it kind of slows down. So my view is listen, learn, act, and stay inspired.
And I would definitely, everything that Cici said, but the act is really important. A lot of times there's conversation and you're asking staff for their opinions, how we can be more inclusive. You know, we have all these discussions and then nothing, like Cici said, it kind of peters out. You know, someone may write a memo or make a commitment, but there's no follow-up, no follow-through sometimes. Not anyone on this call, like Cici said, but it can happen sometimes. And I think that is really important in creating an inclusive environment, because not only do you want people to feel heard, you want them to know that not only did I hear you, I'm going to address what you said and work towards a more inclusive environment for staff and everyone.
Yeah, no, I know I've heard in training the phrase when talking about diversity and inclusion and trying to differentiate the two, the saying diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. So it's like, yeah, you've got to really feel like you are a part of the organization and your voice is heard and there is action taken upon that. So I totally agree. Thank you so much. So that moves us to our next question. How important is it for an organization to have a leadership team committed to diversity? And with that, the idea that how do you continue to work when an administration is not on board with the program?
Sure. So not only is it important, but it's critical, right? So most business initiatives start at the top, right? So I compare it to any other business initiative. When we think we have to increase sales or we have to increase P&L or we have to increase circulation or what, we go straight to the business. So my view when it comes to diversity is really for it to start at the top. And that means not just commitment by words and emails and letters when it's tied to current events, but also the action, as I said, the continued action. And I think also the visibility. So I know with us, Tamara talked about the Let's, or in your bio review, you said we have these incredible Let's Talk Race sessions for employees and community. And it's key that the executive leaders are part of that discussion, you know, and that's visible, right? So it's not only a top-down driven initiative, but it like sales, right? We don't just sit down and say, let's just ask everybody what sales we should do this year, right? It's a top-down initiative when we dedicate what we need to do. So the same thing with diversity, it's a top-down initiative as well as the visibility that it's important and not let that visibility lens leave. And I know the other thing that has happened, just some examples, you know, as proof points for us, when the CEO has an equity, diversity, inclusion council that has been selected and that council reports directly into the CEO or for us, sometimes it's called executive director. But that's not reporting into HR or reporting into a business line. It's the complete line of the CEO, which helps listen and shape the ideas and or structure priorities for our diversity initiative. And I already said that they, you know, attend and are quite visible with Let's Talk Race, identifying diversity champions in our organization, making sure that there are key executives, key leaders, key managers at every branch of the library, so that it doesn't feel like it's only dedicated to Maine or only dedicated to the ethnic, you know, underrepresented neighborhoods. It's all of our neighborhoods. So it is very key that leadership is identified and visible.
And when you don't have that, like what Manny said earlier, like in that question, because some people are going to be resistant to change. I will give some encouragement here, because when we started, I definitely would not say that our CEO or our executive director has been not on board, because she's been on board from the very beginning. But to give just a little bit of history, we started this because a staff person came to us back in 2016 when, you know, the Walter Scott shooting had happened, the Emmanuel 9 shooting had happened in South Carolina, and we were at a pressure point. It was spilling over. And staff people said, well, what do we do? How do we respond to this? As a library, what should we do? And I went to our executive director and I looked at her and I was like, yeah, so What should we do? And I think in that moment, that small germ of an idea, that small seed has grown into all these efforts. So I don't want people to get discouraged and think we just woke up yesterday and this all has come to fruition. It really starts from sometimes a small thing. And I would recommend, if your leadership is not on board, start small. What does it look like to start a book club? Find a book that you think speaks to race in your community or diversity, equity, and inclusion in a meaningful way. Start a book club. Start a discussion. I think our first Let's Talk Race discussion, we had, well, it was Let's Talk Social Justice. We might have had maybe 20 people, 30 people. And within a short period, when we started talking about race, we grew to 100, or more sometimes now. And with staff wanting to now do it, because we started with the public and then we went to staff and then we went to this and then we went to that. So I definitely think just because your management is not on board, it does not stop you from starting change wherever you can. And it may seem small. It may seem like this is not enough. This doesn't even get close to the idea of what you need. You never know what seed you planted, what that's going to spring forth. So my encouragement to anyone who's on this call who may feel like, I don't know if my community is ready, start small. We say start with the cupcake. Don't try to get the wedding cake at first. That's something that we really work on at the library, is really starting small and then watching these ideas grow and bubble up and into bigger impact.
Yeah.
And another key thing that Tamara said and in how we started was, you hear that it's sometimes organic. I think some of us always feel like our leader has to start it, or HR has to start it, or community relation, there has to, organically our employees can start it.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much. Often, we're seeing that a lot of times the impetus for a lot of these programs is on, sadly, events like what we see that led up to like the Black Lives Movement and all of that. But quite frankly, a lot of us experience microaggressions on a more daily basis. And even though they may not seem as important, I think they also can serve as a catalyst for looking into some of this. For example, I remember when I first started at a library that shall remain nameless, the manager knew that, again, with my Hispanic surname, she knew that I was Latino. And after my first day there, she was introducing me to one of the Friends group members and says, she says who I am, and then she says, and he speaks English so well. Just to give you an example, and back then I didn't even know that the term microaggressions even existed. So let's talk a little bit about microaggressions. So what exactly are microaggressions?
Thanks. So sorry, but something that we have heard, right? That kind of example is still, unfortunately, still given in many locations. So if I have time, I'd like to just clarify a couple of terms that we use, because I know we say microaggressions. I'd also like to clarify a couple of other terms that some of us might be familiar with. So I'd start out with what I call the micro messages, right? So micro messages are the difference with those, before we get to microaggressions. The differences between micro messages is sometimes this is a one-time thing. Sometimes it's a small, what we call subtle, seemingly unimportant communication, but it could be words, or it could be body language, it could be tone. Sometimes, like you said, oh, he speaks Spanish, like, oh, this is a great thing. So it could be tone. It can be body language, it can be an expression, but it doesn't happen often. It's like a one-time, it's a micro message. And they may be intentional or unintentional, but the same impact, right? Because they can be perceived as negative. Then we jump to micro inequities. And micro inequities are where we see more of a pattern, right? These are accumulation of negative micro messages. And a lot of times that leads to withdrawal, right? If this happens pretty frequently, an employee may withdraw. or they lose some of their self-esteem because they're not quite sure why this has occurred or why they've been singled out. And so that's the difference between a micro message and a micro inequity. And then to get to what the impact of those micro inequities is that not only do you feel singled out or ignored in some cases, but because it's related to things you can't change. It's either my age, my race, my color, my gender, my disability. Because those are things that I can't change, it's going to continue to happen, or at least my perception is it'll continue to happen. So those micro inequities are really key to someone's performance, because it can impair their contribution and or how they perform. So then that lands us to, so that was micro message, the micro inequities, then it lands us to microaggressions. And if okay, I'd like to just screen share one thing here, which is, give me a second. Okay, give me a second. I thought I had this up. Okay, so this, this is where we talk about microaggressions, right? So microaggressions are what Manny just describes. These are verbal or nonverbal, intentional or not, but the way they impact a person is very negative, right? They heard something, it feels derogatory, it feels negative, and we know that it was targeted specifically at something about that individual. So it's very personal. And so, yes, you said certain language. The screen share that I put up here now says, I wouldn't have expected you to be a science major. Why, right? Oh, welcome to the team. I'm so glad that we're focused on diversity, because now we've got diversity hires in our organization. So sometimes, the intent may not be there, the sound, the inflection, the tone may not be there, but the impact is there. So whether it's intent versus impact, that's what a microaggression is.
You know, and Cici's heard me say this a whole bunch of times as we've been talking about microaggression. I was like, nobody gets dressed. I'll show my Southern roots. No one gets dressed, puts on their clothes, goes to work to be treated badly. Like, that's just not what people do. That's just not, if you get treated badly, it is just by microaggression or just something that happens by happenstance. And I think that's important to remember too. And I think also when you're dealing with microaggressions, we tend to think that the aggressor looks a certain way, or it comes across in a certain, as it relates to race or something like that. But I think what's important, and I think what Cici has just kind of wrapped up for us, that it can be anybody, because you don't mean to be offensive. And I have this saying that you didn't know there was a bird on your head. And somebody has to tell you there's a bird on your head. What you said was offensive to someone. And what you do with that really is really important to making sure that person that gets dressed, does their hair, goes to work, feels included and feels welcomed, and not like they are something to be played with or to be dismissed. So just let people know there's a bird on their head, right, Cici? We say that, I say that a lot. Like, she doesn't know she has a bird on her head. Let's tell her.
Because it level sets, right? It level sets.
Yes.
It takes away from just race or gender, but it can be anything, as we just heard.
Yeah, staff training is really super important. And so I want to move the conversation towards that area, because a lot of times, for example, with the microaggression, the intention is not necessarily to offend, but often that is what ends up happening. That's what the perception is, and that's really key. So in terms of training, what role does diversity, inclusion, and cultural competence training play in addressing microaggressions in the workplace?
Cici does most of our microaggression training for the library.
Sure, and I think that it's key, because when, there's these other terms that I didn't talk about today, which are, sometimes people don't know what they don't know, right? So that goes back to the intent versus the impact. So there's a term that flies out there called unconscious biases, you know. So because some of these biases may be, we all, honestly, we all have biases. We, you know, nobody can say not me, right? We all have biases. But how that impacts us, our thinking in the workplace is different. And so unconscious biases can lead to some poor decisions. So training around those biases, or at least making you aware of what those biases are and how that can impact impact staff, impact customers even, is so important, right? And I say, I don't always believe unconscious biases are unconscious. And you just read my bio, which says I came out of the entertainment world. So one of the examples that I like to prove this point and drive this point home is a couple of years ago, Roseanne Barr, you all know Roseanne Barr from, right, Roseanne Barr. In the middle of the night, she tweets out something, you know, that, you know, Planet of the Apes meets, you know, it was just a horrible, I didn't want to repeat it, but you know, a horrible tweet. And she was talking about Valerie Jarrett, who was a senior advisor to the White House. My question is, was that an unconscious move when you took your phone and you deliberately typed and you sent out a tweet and you hit send? Was that unconscious, right? So my feeling is the training that you talk about is to make people aware of, yes, there are some unconscious biases, but also to keep your biases in check, right? When they're not, that's what we call implicit biases. So I think it's very valuable to have that kind of training for all employees, because we don't want judgments about our employees or our customers, you know? In certain locations of our organization, we may serve a certain population and we don't want biases against that population. We want to train our staff of how to treat everybody equitably. So yes, training is particularly important when you serve a very diverse community and you want to represent that community in an authentic way.
Cici, I would love for you to share one of the things that came out of the training. We talked about microaggression, was people not being spoken to in the morning, as that was a really big thing. Please tell it, because that was surprising to me. Please share that.
Sure. So a lot of times, you know, especially when we talk about DE&I, that's diversity. We talked about that at the beginning of this: diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm going to push that aside and just talk about the B, right? DEIB. That's a sense of belonging. And the belonging piece may not necessarily be tied to DE&I. So Tamara's right. We went through, you know, what are the things that really, the subtle things that really impact your performance? And we went through this, you know, this, you know, couple of hours of discussion. And it was amazing that no matter what location we went to, the number one trigger for them was not speaking to us. So that made people feel invisible. So out of our busyness, our less than thoughtfulness, whatever it was, when managers come to a location, visit, go in, walk right past the desk, right? Go past the checkout, go straight to the manager's office and start a conversation. That made people feel invisible. It made them feel less than. And so you say, well, that's a one-off, right? That's just one location. Well, it wasn't one location. When we moved around, we found that's what happened. And I will also share, not just us, but I heard feedback from Fortune 500s that when the George Floyd, unfortunate George Floyd current events happened and it became such a global phenomenon, I heard feedback from some employees that when they went to work the following week, it was almost business as usual. It was almost, let's just start the meeting, you know, it's Tuesday, it's Wednesday, let's get through the agenda. And without kind of like checking in to see how people feel or what the concerns were. So yes, the check-in, the feedback, the speaking, the message that says, I care. I care about your individuality that you bring to work. If that piece is missing, you're likely, right, you're at risk for flight.
I think part of the reason why some people also may be hesitant is when just the fear of saying the wrong thing. So that brings me to this next question that I have, particularly for you, Cici, because I think you do this kind of work a lot with your employees. What do you say to an employee who says something like, how can I focus on my day-to-day work when I am always thinking that I may be making a microaggression? In other words, tiptoeing around.
Right. So, yes, I think there is an element of training that should happen so that we can make all employees feel comfortable about this discussion. The whole purpose of what Tamara talked about with Let's Talk Race is to create a safe and encouraging platform for employees to talk. That's not limited just to employees or just to supervisors. It's to engage a dialogue amongst people so that they can start sharing and they can start feeling comfortable. If you ask me to go into Delta Airlines and start talking about, performance metrics on success and what do you call that, takeoff times, I'm not going to feel so comfortable. It's not what I do. But if you give me an opportunity to sit down and hear, learn, talk, understand, I might be in a better position to talk mindfully. So that's where I think our obligation is to create these safe environments to encourage those sometimes tough conversations, get the dialogue going so that you have a safe space, even if it is a mistake. Even if it is, but you know that it's a mistake and you can own up to the mistake and you can learn from it. But doing nothing is not the answer.
And that segues great into the question that I have for Tamara, which is about the Let's Talk Race program that you started at Richland. So can you tell us a little bit about what Let's Talk Race is and its effect on the perspective that participants have on race?
Oh, yeah, definitely can talk about it. But I also want to just echo what Cici said when we talked about, like, after the George Floyd thing happened, the social unrest that followed, we did an immediate Let's Talk Race for staff. We had over 100, and I think we did 2 sessions with over 100 people both times, because we understood that there were some supervisors who didn't know what to say. And I think that's important too. Microaggressions, like Cici's saying, sometimes they're very unintentional, like that unconscious bias. Those things, sometimes you just don't know what to say, so you avoid the whole thing. And I think with Let's Talk Race, that's one of the beauties of what we've been able to accomplish. One of the things I always say when we start Let's Talk Race, it's less effective now that we're all in our home, but I say, look at the ground where you are. Right now, you're on hallowed ground. This space is now someplace safe. You can ask your questions, you can have that discussion. Feel safe. I want you to feel like this is a place that will hold you and hold what you say private. And that kind of sets a tone for what we get ready to do. So with Let's Talk Race, we were trained staff of about 12. It grows depending on time, but right now we're about 12 of us. We are trained staff. We have been trained to moderate courageous conversations, difficult conversations. We've tackled everything from social justice, women's rights, now race. We keep wanting to move on to the next topic, but things keep happening. So we've stayed on race for quite a while now, about 2.5 years, and we've really been able to create great impact. And we've had over 2,000 people attend. The numbers grow every time. We not only do it for the public, we've also done them for employees. I think every single employee has now gone through it in some way. We did departments for Let's Talk Race. We're doing one for our board of trustees. And what happens typically is that we have each moderator that sits at a table, and we take these big complex questions and we narrow them down to just people talking and having dialogue. And you're surprised at what kinds of things bubble up. One of the most memorable for me, and I talk about it all the time because it was probably the most real conversation I've ever had about race, and how the impact of, especially being Southern. I was at a table, I was moderating a discussion, and there was a self-proclaimed reformed white supremacist who was in his 80s. There were other two African-American women who were in their 80s, and they were from New York, and they were feminist. We had a teacher that taught race and equity and diversity and inclusion for the University of South Carolina at our table as well. And we had two young people who were in college. And it was so amazing to have that question, you know, to have these older Black ladies say, okay, well, what did you learn about race and why did you become a white supremacist? And have this white supremacist say, well, it was around me everywhere. I got it in school. I got it from the pulpit at church. I got it from my home. That's an honest conversation. I mean, how many times are you ever going to be at a table and able to talk to someone who was a white supremacist and say, hey, why did you have those ideals? To even talk to some feminists from New York and you're from South and ask, how did you get your ideals? How shaped you? How did those things shape you? And so we've been able to have these really important conversations, and we started really small. Like I said, our first group was maybe 25, 20 maybe, and we've grown to now being able to tackle a room of 400, which is no easy feat when you've got 400 people talking about race and what shapes you. And we do exercises like check your privilege. We do this finger exercise. I can definitely share with you guys where you hold up your fingers and you kind of go through these microaggressions that people of color have to deal with all the time. Like put a hand down if you've ever been on an elevator and someone clutched their purse. Put a hand down if you've ever seen someone or someone ask you if you can afford something expensive. Put a hand down if you've ever been threatened by the police or threatened when you see a police car. So at the end of that, ultimately what happens are people of color have very few fingers left, and then white people have a lot of fingers left. And it is a visual representation of systemic racism, but it's also that visual representation that people are treated differently. And that's true, because everybody can't be lying. Like that's something my friend's grandmother says all the time. When you see so many people having the same experience, everyone can't be lying. There has to be some truth to it. So Let's Talk Race is that moment of truth. That's the way I look at it. It's been this really honest moment where people can put down their bags, not be afraid how people are going to carry those bags away, and really have a deep discussion.
Wow, we're gonna have to steal that one for Queens Public Library. Great.
The finger exercise, I'll have to send it to you. I'll share it with you. It's really great.
So in these events, what do you think it means when people don't want to talk or when they stay quiet about a particular question or event or exercise?
We just had that happen recently. We did one for a nonprofit, and the nonprofit had very few staff of color. When there were questions about race, the staff of color were very open to talking, and they felt dismissed because certain colleagues didn't say anything. But I had to remind them that you don't know what people are kind of processing and working through, and we can't put assumptions on why people don't talk. I mean, I think that's the whole reason for Let's Talk Race. We can't make assumptions, right? Like that's what the whole point of what we're trying to do is erase those assumptions. And I can tell you that I have talked to people later. They'll come to you later, kind of secretly, and they'll say, listen, I heard the N-word all the time growing up as a kid. I didn't think it impacted me. I thought I was beyond that. And I realize now that I hold some of that still. And thank you for sharing that with me. Your talks have helped me have conversations with my family and my friends. So like I always say, that small push, that small conversation can really yield big impacts.
Awesome, great. So for those who might be planning on implementing EDI initiatives, training, whatever it may look like at their institutions, what advice, and this is for both of you, by the way, what advice would you offer? I mean, what works, what doesn't work, you know?
Cici?
Sure. So, you know, as we use this term, cupcakes, right? So you can't just run out the gate and create this entire comprehensive initiative. You know, you kind of have to build up to it. So my recommendation is to first do some training, like we just talked about, but also be open to feedback regarding anybody's feedback, right? Provide an opportunity of what Tamara says, like the hollow ground. create an opportunity where it's safe to provide that kind of feedback around various behaviors and messagings. I also put some ownership on our managers to meet with your staff. If they're not comfortable speaking in an open forum yet, because this is new, then meet in smaller, one-on-one, smaller groups to encourage the discussion, right? So make sure that any of these opportunities to find out where there could possibly be some microaggressions. So Manny, using your example, that might not have been something that you would have shared in your first meeting with, 100 execs, but if you had a one-on-one with somebody, or a smaller team group, you might have said, let me mention how I felt when this happened, right? So it's to kind of start out small, but it can certainly impact the whole organization. And then tie everything back to why we even go to work, right? The reason, this is not a separate, standalone, on the side kind of work, right? The efforts are to help us build better relationships with our customers, to build a better rapport between managers and employees, to ensure that peer-to-peers are comfortable talking. A lot of what we hear comes out of peer-to-peer discussions, and employees will find somebody to talk to, whether that's their manager, whether that's HR, whether that's their CEO, but they will find somebody that they're going to talk to. And then how does that impact the way we attract new people, right? If we are in this silo and we're not effectively managing diversity, equity, and inclusion, then how do we successfully attract new candidates to our branch, to our libraries, and retain the ones that we have? Because if we get to an organization where we're not comfortable, what are we going to do, right? We're either not going to perform or we're going to leave. And then lastly, I would say that we want to hold ourselves accountable. This is not somebody else's work. This is our work. And if we want to thrive and we want others to thrive, then we will contribute.
Okay, thank you so much. I just have one last question before we open it up to the questions that are coming in through the chat. There's a quote by Franklin Leonard: "If you are in a place of power, equity can seem like oppression." Can you talk a little bit about this? Like, what does that mean, and how can we change it? Either one.
I think for me, I hate to go back to what I've learned from Let's Talk Race and the conversations, but they really are this great case study on race in the South especially, and at work, just hearing different stories. And we had someone who was a staff person who told a list of stories, and they were stories from her childhood. And she thought they made her come off very altruistic and like she was a friend to people of color, an ally. But what really happened is it came off kind of like the white savior, or it was triggering for a lot of people in the conversation. And she really lashed out because people weren't agreeing with what she thought they should feel. And at that moment, she was very upset. And then come to find out, she'd had other issues where she'd had some other run-ins with staff people who thought that her type of behavior was not exactly well received. And I will say that what happened after that, I felt like she felt like creating equity and understanding people's opinions felt like she was being oppressed. She felt like she was being made small. She experienced what I think Robin DiAngelo talks about, white fragility, that moment where it's like, wait a minute, I'm not awesome. No offense to her, anyone else, but I can say for that case, she just did not understand. And then after Let's Talk Race, I mean, this woman was like, I don't want to have these conversations. I'll never talk about it with staff. They just want to make you feel bad. And she and I had several conversations afterwards. And I can tell you this woman now is a person who reads How to Be an Anti-Racist. She's read Stamp from the beginning. She's been really talking about Black Lives Matter. She is one of the biggest champions and understands how what she says could be triggering. So I bring that up because in that moment, she felt oppressed. She felt like not everyone thinks I'm great. I am losing power here. I am losing the power of privilege to think that what I've said is gold and everyone should just go along with it. And because she felt really strong in her opinions. And in her conversation, she said things like Black people don't vote. And there were a number of things she said that she felt like those truths were her truths. So when when confronted with that, she felt that oppression, or she felt like that equity of understanding each other and listening was something being taken away from her. And I'm sure Cici will say it way better than I just did. But to me, it's that moment when you take equity as a loss for you. Giving something up or making someone else equal in whatever way you can, you see that as you somehow losing, which happens a lot. Now, Cici will give you the graceful answer.
No, I can't add anything to that, to my colleague. She summed it up, and I certainly was involved with that, so I can certainly echo exactly what Tamara said. The only thing that I would add is a different lens, because, and it's not on the answer, it's on who's in power. Because I think what I have found is every level of employee is looking up as the next, as to who is in power. So with us, we're probably no different than anybody on the call. We've got an executive director, then we've got some chief staffs, then we've got some director of library experience. You know, we got a whole lot of titles that go in almost like a hierarchical order. And each one of those groups below is looking up. What I had to try to explain to some of our manager levels, which might be a couple of levels down from the ED, is that they didn't realize that they were perceived as position of power. So they're thinking of themselves as an employee in the seat of employee with positions of power ahead of them. And that's what I had to make them realize was, you don't get it. Other people are looking at you as the position of power. So your work, your voice, your contribution, level of commitment, visibility is being perceived from that next layer. So I would encourage us all to remember, there is no admin or senior leader. Everybody is looking up to the next layer, and that might be some of us who are that next layer.
Well, thank you. I do want to have let some of the questions from the chat. Tracy, could you?
Yes. One of the questions is the goal to change people or change behaviors in the workplace?
I want to know how we can change people. I'm a mother of 2 college students, and I can't change those little people. They are who they are. Now, I might be able to influence behavior if we educate, if we arm with information, if we can parallel to some of the successes that they may see, if we can provide responses to their questions, if we can show the commitment top down, we might be able to change behavior, but I'm not positive I know how to change people.
Thank you. Another question, how has Richland helped staff members understand that pointing out that someone has made a microaggression isn't an attack, but an opportunity for learning?
That's a Cici question as well.
Okay, I'll take that one, but I think we have shared ownership of how. The how is, what we did, honestly, is we changed the language. So it didn't come across as attacking. It didn't come across as victimized. It came across as, don't know whether you meant it or not, but that's a trigger for me, right? I don't know if it's a trigger for the other 99 people, but for me, when you say you're happy I can speak English, that's a trigger for me, because I can speak English, and I'm not sure that you would have said that to the other 98 people. So it doesn't place blame on somebody. It lets you know that that's how I received it. And that's what we do. We actually set some, we kind of set some definitions. There's the sender of the message, the receiver of the message, and sometimes it's neither one. Sometimes it's an observer who just happened to have heard that conversation, and then they may have raised it as an issue. But we all have some role to ensure that people have a welcoming and belonging sense of belonging.
And I think it's important not to make the person, not to paint them with this broad brush, like there's no, you meant that. You meant to be you meant to be hard on that person, or you meant that as something that was a microaggression. And I think Cici's been really good at speaking to the issue, not all the issues, speaking to that one issue, that one thing that has caused, the reason why we're now in the room with Cici.
There's one more. So this one person wanted to know, how do you measure impact?
I think I can, Cici's would be more than capable to answer this question, but for us, I think it's that outcome versus output. Output are our numbers, right? Like how many people came to Let's Talk Race. Output is, how many people signed up on our email list, or how many authors we've been able to get, or how much funding and awards and things like those. Those are great successes and those are great outputs. But outcomes for us are people that come to us and say, I've decided to join the NAACP. I've decided to be more proximate. We, at the end of our Let's Talk Race meetings, we tend to give people things they can do if they want to do more work. If you want to challenge yourself and get out of your bubble, here's what you can do. And we give them a list of things that they can do. And if people come to us and say, hey, I started a book club with my friends, thank you. I think that's how we measure our outcomes and our successes. It's not so much the numbers, it's how many people have shifted their perspective and perceptions, or felt like they could be honest in a space that the library created.
Great.
Cici probably has a more eloquent answer though.
Okay, so it seems like we are out of time, but I have one last question for each of you, and it is, what do you hope to see in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think for me, what I'd like to see, and one of the things that we're working on, is the library, because people call on us all the time to ask how we've done this work, is for us to create a really thoughtful curriculum for libraries all over the country that they can use, toolkits and videos and things like that. I would love to see more of that work. And I would love to expand on our My Life experience, our virtual empathy lab that we've created. I have a lot of thoughts and plans for that. And I would love to see that be explored more. And I would like for the library to continue to be a leader for this work, and not only in our community, but for other libraries who may not have access to the wonderful ideas and work of Cici Holloway, or the Let's Talk Race team, or don't have the money to fund getting trained. So how do we create impact, not just where we are, but these ripple effect? I think that's where I'd like to see us go in the next 5 to 10 years.
And again, I mean, that's why we work so well together, because we respect each other and we certainly share similar views. The only thing I would add, just from an, again, HR standpoint, is I would like us to be in 5+ years, I would like us to have a real good understanding of our customers and the needs of our customers, anticipating the needs of our customers. And the only way we can do that is to have a diverse workforce, and so that's one thing I want to do, is make sure that the reason we exist as libraries is to serve customers and to serve them in an effective, efficient, and in what I call an anticipatory way. I also want to see that we have created opportunities for advancement within our organization in a very equitable way. Many of us have been criticized at the number of Blacks who have MLIS degrees, and therefore, they cannot excel. And so how do we remove some of those barriers that, or other measurements? Like, how do we encourage our employees to get what they need to move ahead. And that's our role, to help progress. Now, I'm also going to end a little bit on a humorous note, because for many years, you heard chief diversity officers say, oh no, we've been a success when I've done my work, and there's no longer a need for my job, right? We no longer need a chief diversity officer because we've done it. Well, I don't say that, because I don't know any organization that says, we don't need a chief revenue officer. We don't need a chief financial officer. When we know our numbers, we no longer need a CFO. So I don't say that anymore. I say the role of the chief diversity officer changes, but you still need one.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are a little past the hour. I'm not sure if we could ask any more questions, or if Jeremy, if you want to take it away.
We can stay on the line for a little bit if you'd like, or we can wrap up. Either way.
No, I saw some questions that were still coming in. That's why. So, Tracy, you probably see more of the questions, but I did see a few here.
I may have missed some.
Well, there was one that I'd like. I think that it's how to conduct yourself when a supervisor constantly harasses an employee with microaggressions.
Oh.
Yeah, like how do you deal? Yeah, how do you deal with microaggressions when you're the one, especially when it's your supervisor, but just in general?
Not fun.
Not fun.
Sure. And so one of the things I said earlier was about level setting the language, because I don't know too many people that want to tell their direct supervisor that they've, done something that's harmful, because now there's potential for a reaction to that. But when the language is level set, where it says intent versus impact, this is how I received it, it takes some of the ownership on me, the way I heard it and I received it. So that's one way. And you got to have a lot of strength to do that. The other thing is when the organization understands that language. So remember, there are certain roles. There's the sender, the receiver, and the observer. So as an observer, right, sometimes an observer can also weigh in with, yeah, I did see, or I did hear, or the way I interpreted that when I heard you say that to Manny, this is how I felt. So it takes some of the interaction away from a direct line between employee and supervisor. It engages more help. And then, of course, I always encourage you to go to human resources. That's what we do.
Oh yes, definitely.
That was Cici's nice answer. I've been in that role. What I've experienced a lot of microaggression, and I am no longer there. So.
And that's what I said. Micro messages over time causes
they wear you down
to withdraw, disengage, or quit.
I did all three.
Well, I want to thank you both for a wonderful and just inspiring presentation. I really learned a lot. Being a training person myself, there's a lot that I can take away, and I'm sure that a lot of our audience feels that there's a lot here for them as well. So I want to really thank you for that. And Jeremy, it's all yours.